So, welcome to Business Breakthrough. We've got a couple of really interesting interviews this morning, which the first of which I'm going to hand over to Jill to manage. Jill, over to you.
Good morning, everybody. And this morning, I'm really pleased to welcome Qing Lin to joining us. She's very last minute, so thank you very much, Qing, for making the time this morning. I know it's an early start. So why don't you introduce yourself first? Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Good morning. Thank you for having me. My name's Ching and Jill. Thank you for the opening for me. I'm based in Cirencester and I run a small business to help the UK business to tap into the fastest growing region in the world, which is in Asia. I started with the focus for China, obviously, about 15 years ago. So because I understand that for large organizations, they have the capacity and then also the financial power to tap into a foreign country much easier than the SMEs. And my passion stays with SMEs. And I believe that it's SMEs that need handheld kind of support, even just something quite straightforward, quite simple to them. If you don't know how to do it, I'm sure we have, some tradesmen, for example, they would appreciate what I'm trying to say. So I started this business 15 years ago with the passion to make sure that the local SMEs can tap into the fastest growing sector, and then also, using the international trade to develop and grow their business. So that's where I am.
Fantastic. So tell us then how has UK and China trade relations really evolved over about the last 10 years, over the past decade?
This is quite an interesting situation, development, should I say. And I possibly will join Nick to, if he's nodding, then I will carry on. If he's shaking his head, I'm possibly just going to change my tack in a minute. I think I've been living, I'll give a bit of background. I lived in Japan, in Thailand, in South Korea for a few years before I settled in the UK 24 years ago. So it's been a long time. I lived abroad longer than I was, living in China. And I think we call it a golden era. I think that's a David Cameron. He called it the golden era. The relationship with China was fantastic when I first arrived in the UK. And for what we talk about at the moment, fast forward to post-pandemic, we definitely have a geopolitical tension. However, I'm not going to launch into a massive speech, and I'll try to summarize. I think what's happening now is for businesses, we need to remember whatever's happened. I understand, there were some saying, hey, you can't separate the politics with the economics and the business. But what I'm trying to say is from an SME's point of view, whatever's happening with the political, the presidents and the prime ministers, is for them to deal with it. From what I stand in, and I hope Nick would agree with me, businesses, they still very strongly want to trade with each other.
Right.
Now, I am British citizen. I make it very clear, and I'm not dual nationality. I'm not allowed, by the way. It's not I don't want to do it. I just make it very clear. Why I stand, and then when I'm talking to business people from China, from UK, Singapore, Japan, Hong Kong, Taiwan. I've been traveling, since the post-pandemic. The people want to trade with each other. They want it to. They are very aware of the governments have a bit of tension. They are falling out. They're not friends with each other. But my point is, pick the right people, work with the right people, let a politician, I want to say do their job, but I don't think they're doing it. I said it, it's recorded. But businesses, we're human beings. We want to do business with human beings. So take on board the geopolitical problems, tensions, challenges, but let's stick with the business community. Okay. And that's what I want to do. That's the message I want to pass through.
And so what are the primary opportunities for UK businesses in the Chinese market?
This is quite interesting, a good question. Jill, so China at the moment is in a sort of a tricky situation. What I want you to actually encourage the business community is to consider Asia. Asia now is the fastest growing region in the world. That is the fact. That's without shadow of doubt. And I want you to say, I appreciate, obviously my focus, it was in China, and that is my strength. But for SMEs, it's, you know what, you don't have to just think about China. You can think about Hong Kong. I appreciate that, Hong Kong is belongs to China, but that's not my point. Think about Taiwan, think about Singapore. The reason I mentioned that is if China is the country they identified, they're possibly not too sure a little bit on the, Hong Kong is still a very good starting point for obvious reasons. Number one, they use English. Number two, British law, since they understand British law. So, and also 99 years, under the governance of Britain. So they have a very good understanding, and they hybrid, and they are in a very helpful situation for the UK business to test it out. So go to Hong Kong first if they're not too sure, then they can see whether this is something they wanted to do. I'm not ruling out to go straight into China, but that's another little more complex kind of a topic. So I don't want to, SME to get put off, because there's definitely a simple testing, quite straightforward way in comparison. So that's what I'm trying to say.
So focusing on China specifically, and maybe we'll talk about the others in a second, is, there's the opportunities, but then what are the key challenges for a UK business to face when they're operating in or with China?
I think, give a little bit a context. China is a vast country, and there's a 56, they call it ethnic minorities officially. Now, we say ethnic minorities, they have their own language, own costume, own culture, own mentality, own society rules. So respect that. So they essentially, I would say, almost run in a little country within a country. Yeah. And obviously, that's not how China works. So for that reason, the challenges for Western business to go into China is they essentially dealing with new entity individually, or you speak the same language. So the challenge usually is how does the Chinese people think? And it will say Chinese people think, and it will say, well, hang on a minute, are you talking about the southern people? Or you talk about the, people in Midland or northern? So can I just ask which one you're talking about?
Yeah.
So challenge usually is where do you start? How do you want to play it? So once they get that sorted, actually they become more clear. So step at a time. And that's what I would suggest.
And then are there any challenges if they're looking at Taiwan, Singapore, and the other parts of Asia, or is it exactly the same thing that you need to understand the culture and the the ethos?
That's a very good point. Yeah, there's 2,000 languages being spoken in Southeast Asia, 2,000 languages, and what we can say is what is helpful is it's not about whether someone speaks the same language as you. It's never really about language. It's about nuances, the mentality, the upbringing, the background, the environment and maneuver in. So the Western business, best to pay attention to that, because they can speak perfect English, much better than mine, but they don't necessarily appreciate or understand what the Western side is coming from. And that usually small gesture causing major issue. I mean, even for us now, we live in the same country, it happens. So the challenge is pay attention to details. Yeah. The devil is in the details.
Okay. And then, so you've got a business, say you've got an SME in the UK, and they've decided that, China, will concentrate on China. China is one of their target markets. How do they even get started with navigating what it sounds like it's quite a complex environment?
I always, if someone say, hey, Ching, I want to go to China. I was like, well, okay, lovely, great. Yes, let's have some fun, eat some chicken feet. The first thing is, what sector is that business in?
Right. Okay.
And so once we identify the sector, then we can help them say, right, which region in China, then we narrow down to which province. And then in the province, because the largest province in China is 200 million people. It's a province. So then I will say, right, we pin down the region, the province, which district. Let's do this first. Once we get down, everything else, I say it in a hypothetical speaking, like will fall into places. So let's pin down a geographic location first. Where do you want to bring your business to? Okay, someone might say, consumer product. Just throw it out there. E-commerce is everywhere. I'll say, okay, I'm just going to throw, into all the consumer. I just like, Nick possibly would agree with me. Well, what kind of a consumer looking at it? Are you looking at, sorry, I'm just looking at my table now, you know, are you looking at a coaster? You want to sell a coaster to the whole China? Then we need to go down that route. If you're saying you got a little bit IP, you know, technical things, you know, and they want to sell to consumers, so what type of consumer? Medical devices? Well, then we need to go down registration.
Yeah. So as part of that complex environment, I'm just thinking that we've got Matt on the call, and maybe he can add in something at the end. What about things like branding and colours and all those sorts of things in terms of how you're actually presenting your business into this new world? And do you almost need a separate website for the different cultures, or do you adapt to you know what you've got? I mean, how do businesses navigate that particular piece?
Right, IP, that's a brilliant question, Joe. Brilliant. I constantly get asked by the SMEs, say, what's going on with the IP? IP, China had past terms. Terrible reputation, terrible. But they definitely getting much, much, much better, okay? If in doubt, you can employ a local lawyer, can do that with you. If in doubt, I don't trust Chinese lawyer, whatever you want to do. The system is universal. The Chinese follow, there's a word for it, and suddenly so international rules, first come, first serve, that kind of, you know, first register, you know, first, you know, that kind of thing. So whatever in the past, that's an old story. It's not true. It's not true. It's absolutely Chinese is, you know, very hot on IP. Talk about branding and register the Chinese website. Be honest with you, in the olden days, everybody will tell you, so be it. And from a business point of view, you want to earn money, I'll say, oh, yeah, definitely, it's better. However, there's many other ways that you can do the promotion, you can do the marketing, you can do, you know, whether have a Chinese in China or based in here, of course it'll be better because of the traffic, because of the firewall, because of the, you know, access to the vast market. However, my focus is SMEs. If SMEs is thinking that's another extra kind of expenses, then I look at other ways. Come back to specific branding. Yes, the font, the color, the style, they are very important, and also packaging.
Right. Okay.
It's all about packaging. I know sounds really shallow.
No.
I have been traveling around. It's all about packaging. I wish I got something to show you because I just had a meeting last night, and a Chinese contact just gave me a gift, which is it just out of the. When you move on with Nick, I'm possibly going to get it and then show everybody just to make a point. So yeah, that is what it's like in China. Do pay attention.
And then if somebody's looking to get into China, I mean, obviously one of the things that we always recommend is that you do some market research before you hit a new segment, or you produce. I mean, how do you research whether there is a market for your product or service in China?
I'll be honest with you, market research, I'm always a sit on the fence. The reason I sit on the fence is I have done it. I work with my clients to do it. I work with a government representative to do it. I don't necessarily want it to go because everybody got their own opinion.
Yeah.
Personal experience, working with both sides, case by case.
Okay, that's fair. Okay, that's fair enough. Okay. And so once somebody's actually got into the market and started doing business, are there any really top tips for how they should be nurturing that relationship and what's expected in terms of customer service and, you know, and all of those sorts of things?
Dinner for that now.
Sorry?
You're taking me out for dinner for that now. I possibly a lot of colleagues here joined us already heard about this Chinese vocabulary called the guanxi. Guanxi, if we want to translate it from dictionaries like relationship, like
okay.
But it's much deeper than that. My apologies for the dog, sorry if 5,000 years Chinese people is all about respect.
Mm-hmm.
and show respect and present respect, and that translates into how does this guanxi come from. So I'll give you a quick example. If I have a new client in different sectors, so all that homework is being done, so we're ready to
yeah.
I will always tell my clients, say, oh, so and so, based in China, is coming from da 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 da. So it's almost like a traceable. What was that person in China that I introduced to you? And it's because everything is traceable. So the top tip is do spend energy and invest in building relationship, whether just with one person or with the group, because that it's absolutely priceless. Even if in the future you don't necessarily gain financial reward, you can always call this person up, say, can you help me? We call it a favor. So the top tip and the only tip I'll give out today is, please, if you're talking about Asia, this is actually not just for China. In Asia, please invest in relationship building.
Right.
That means spend time with them, be sincere, be true to yourself, hang out with them. Majority of the business happen at a dinner table, over a meal. Of course, you're going to the boardroom to sign contract. And that is, I'm very strongly want to recommend that. Just to remember that.
Okay. So really basically no different from doing business anywhere else, really.
Do you know what? Actually, feel like a human being. That's why I said I'm going back to geopolitical tension.
It's just that you might need to be conscious of the different cultural aspects of doing
regulation, compliances, the way. But then, I live in San Francisco. People in the Forest of Dean might think slightly different in Tewkesbury, in Cheltenham, down south in Devon, So and up north in Scotland, I go to Scotland once a month. So treat everybody like a human being. Do your best and be true to yourself, and make friends, and they will be there for you. Pretty simply, whether anywhere in the world, isn't it?
And so one other question around that piece is are there any absolute no-nos that Western people continually do that really is not well accepted by either China or other cultures in Asia?
Yeah, there's a quite interesting. So I sometimes I take a group of first-timer into different Asian countries. Okay, just say China because I understand both culture. I won't say culture well, you know what I mean. The Western side always a little bit too bold.
Oh, okay.
Little bit too bold. What I mean is, so you usually the hospitality being shown on the dinner table. So you've been taking, all this meal. The Western always, what's in it? What's it? And it's tricky because if I say what it is, you feel like you're having a biology lesson. And once I tell you, you're thinking, ooh, that's so usually what I would say is I learned, as I just have a taste. Then obviously then you can explain. And this is the bad, the bad examples, like they put face, they make a comment, and then you're sort of trying to have a conversation. But again, in the UK, it's the same thing. It was like, well, I've just been true to myself. Ching told me to be true to myself. I was like, to be true to yourself and being a little bit rude to the whole thing.
Yeah. I mean, that doesn't mean to be rude, or be seen to be rude. Yeah.
Yeah. So I also have some of the colleagues that travel with me say, just have a taste and just very quietly put it up. The Chinese, they are not stupid. They observe it. They're very experienced as well. They wouldn't, necessarily push you to that. And another lesson, another warning is make sure you got your beer belly with you, because the Chinese always want to drink the European under the table. They love doing that with the European, especially from the UK. And make sure you're armed with all the facts about football.
Oh, okay. Well, yeah.
I have to talk about football because the Chinese just love talking about football. Nick is shaking his head.
So I suppose just to summarise, and then we'll see if there's any questions before I hand back to Pete to interview Nick. Is to me, from what you said, then there isn't really any difference doing business. It's just you've got to be very curious and ask lots and lots of questions from people that know, so that what the slightly different, if you like, the slightly different rules of the game are. Yeah. But in terms of knowing your customer, every business in the UK should know their customer wherever they're selling to them, nurturing those relationships. Every business should be doing that. So the fundamental principles are exactly the same. It's just that maybe the application and some of the nuances, it will be very, very different in a very different marketplace. Yeah.
This is not a sales pitch, Jill. You sum it up really well. But for the business that me and Nick set up, this on a more of a little bit formal note is we do recommend find a partner.
Absolutely, yeah.
We do recommend that because it's just not worth it to save whatever money that business is thinking and believe everybody can travel. They speak perfect English. I understand the culture. I'm going to be sincere. I'm going to be true to myself. But how about rules, regulations? How about the policies? How about the all these nuances? It's just very difficult. So maybe have a support for certain amount of a time. Then that support come off. I'm not saying whole business.
No. But I mean, that's true for any part of your business. None of us, unless you're a social media expert, then find somebody who's an expert at social media to either mentor you or do it for you. If you want your brand done, then talk to people like.
If you want property to be looked after.
Use experts because we cannot all be experts in every single aspect of our business.
Joe, you're the perfect client. Do you want to go to Asia with me? You're the perfect client. Only if every business think like that, the life will be easier. Would you agree, Nick? If every business.
Well, it's basically partly what we do. Partly what we do in the kitchen is we ask all these questions to get people thinking about who are their client, what is it they're offering, how do they nurture the relationship, how do they build communications, what expertise do they need.
Downside is I'm gonna finish this. Is people always think they can do it themselves. They generally always, and I just I'm not saying you can't, mate, but what I'm trying to say is, really, you want to do this? Yeah, but someone so done it. I was like, yeah, true, so-and-so never built a house and built a whole house. But that's not the point I'm trying to say, mate. I'm trying to help you to eliminate the risk and the problem. So come on, be wise, right?
Yeah.
So the perfect client.
Before we wrap up with Ching, has anybody got any questions? If you want to unmute yourself and just ask, or I'll hand back to Pete.
Well, I've got a question anyway. Ching, how do you see the thinking geopolitically at the moment, and obviously the alignment that's going on to a degree anyway between China and Russia, and then the whole Ukraine thing, and then the threats and the national security threats about the backdoors on. Now, obviously, that's all big level, top level geopolitical stuff. But you've obviously got more of an insight to it than the most of us, even if it maybe at a more mundane grassroots level isn't possibly in your face as an issue. But how do you see all that? How do you see it now, and how do you see it developing?
I just had a meeting last night with one of a long-term contacts, just traveled into the UK with a group of Chinese business. The sentiment is the business wanted to collaborate with us. The difficulties is the government, they're not showing solid support because their focus is on politics. So the businesses in China feels they're on their own, which it's quite unfortunate. I always try to look at the bright side. What I see is it gives the British business a better footing to collaborate with the Chinese because they're even more keen to work abroad. In the short term, which is going to be very short term, how this whole situation develops, it will be quite challenging. It will be quite challenging. What is happening from if we want to dig around and find things more positive is the Chinese still got huge amount of savings, and the Chinese government is trying to drum up the domestic consumption, which is trying to bring the economic back to life. That gave us the Western business a good starting point. So my advice would be keep an eye on what's going on around the whole world, be aware of the situation, yet focus on the human level. That's what I would say.
Thanks, Ching.
Okay. That's my serious.
It's interesting. I mean, there's not going to be a simple answer to this, and it is, you know, if you go back to the building of relationships, that's a tangentially different place to the geopolitics. So it's just interesting to hear a perspective on it.
Yeah, it's only because the government, they're not friends, you know, put it bluntly, but doesn't mean the Chinese people don't want to be our friends.
Yeah. Okay. Brilliant. Thanks very much indeed, Ching.
Gosh, well, thank you, Ching, so much. And our next interviewee today is Nick. Now, Nick also has strong connections. He's even based to a degree in China. Nick Obolensky. First of all, I think before we get into it, Nick, do you want to just introduce yourself for the purpose of the video and those who will be watching this, Nick?
Yeah, hi everybody. I'm Nick Obolensky. I have two companies, have a UK company, and I also own a Chinese company. Both do the same thing, which is bringing a completely new approach to leadership, organizational development. It's a mixture, if you like, of bringing new thinking in and consulting, and essentially working with large companies and small companies to get better results for less effort, and that's what we do.
Brilliant. Thank you. And we've just been hearing in an interview that we did just before this one from Ching, who based in the UK, is Chinese herself and has a lot of interest in the, obviously on both sides of that equation. There's been a lot of negative press about China in the UK, and there's a lot going on, and we've been hearing a little bit more about the sort of the grassroots story and the keenness of Chinese businesses to actually do business widely, and there's a slightly disconnect between the top level political, geopolitical, national situation that's currently going on, and then the local government, and then the actual business of the grassroots. I'm fascinated, Nick, to get your take on that. You know, I think you're actually sat there in China at the moment, and of British origin, so you're absolutely the reverse of Ching in many ways. But you're there and both interacting in China. So what's your take on that whole situation of the between UK and China that we have at the moment?
So I think the geopolitical context does have an impact, if you like, but it's not as great as one would think. I think you have to understand that there is a tension between, let's say, America, which used to be the big kid on the block, and you know the number one superpower. And now you have this new kid appearing on the block, and in some cases overtaking what America does. And so there's inevitably going to be that tension. And I think what's interesting is having a deeper understanding of China is quite difficult. I was working with some American diplomats living in China. I said, what is your biggest challenge day to day? And they said, their biggest challenge day to day, and I was expecting them to talk about all the problems they had in China. I said, no. Biggest challenge is trying to get the State Department to actually understand what's going on, because they have this very narrow view of what China is like and how it works. China is a very dynamic place. It's a very sophisticated market, but there's huge opportunity for business here, and it's not as difficult as one would think.
Interesting. And do you think, just staying with that tone for a minute, obviously we look at things, we hear the media on a very immediate level here in the UK. How do you see that all? Are you optimistic about the future of this relationship, or are you concerned about it? How do you feel about it very simplistically over the next decade or so?
Well, it's quite sad because, you know, I read the British papers, I read the American papers, you know, I keep abreast of what's going on, and you don't read many positive stories about China. There's a drip, negative. And that, of course, colors people's perceptions about the opportunity with China. I think we have far more in common with China than the differences. I think people have far more in common with each other, and businesses have far more in common in China than the differences, but we tend to look at the differences. And so in terms of the future and the future of the relationship, look, China's here. China's not going away, and we are totally, you know, very integrated economy. The danger is that the more we try and disaggregate and the more we try and separate, the greater the risk. So yes, there are some risks at the geopolitical level, but at the local level, the business opportunities are a lot larger, and it's a much more dynamic and interesting market than many other markets in the world.
Yeah, interesting. So Nick, having covered the big picture, the geopolitical sort of big stuff that of course we can totally affect in our own right every day, Tell us a little bit. Why are you actually there? You're a Brit. Why are you sat there in China? What are you doing over there?
Well, I tell you, it's very easy living here. I'm in Shanghai. Shanghai is probably one of the best towns, most best cities in the world to live. It's clean, it's convenient. You can walk the streets at night. You don't have to worry about your pocket being picked. And the people here are fantastic. They've got a great sense of humor. They're open, they're polite, and so it's very easy living. Running a Chinese company has its challenges, of course, and I'm now grappling with the new tax, the local tax. There are 20 tax offices in Shanghai alone, and each one has their own separate way of dealing with things. So my particular tax office is probably not the easiest one to deal with. So there are some hurdles you have to go through, but I think that's the same as doing business in any country. There's always going to be difficulties. The opportunities are great. It's a very dynamic market. A lot of people said, oh, well, China is having some problems, but look, it's going at 5%. So that's adding, if you like, to the world economy, the half of the French economy every year. So, it's ticking along. There are some headwinds. There are some issues with real estate. But then compared to the real estate issues we saw in America in 2008, they're pretty small problems. So, yeah, there are issues, but it's easy living. It's easy to do business here. You need to have a partner. That's one thing I would say. Someone who can speak the language very well, and someone who can perhaps understand the nuance, because there are always different nuances. But it's easy living. And a lot of my friends, a lot of my expats who come back to UK, we go backwards and forwards, and all of them say the same thing, which is every time they get on the plane to fly back to China from the UK, they breathe a huge sigh of relief.
Brilliant. And what does your business actually do over there?
So we do the same business as we do in the West, which is leadership development, organizational development, bringing a new way of thinking into businesses.
So very much in the service sector. And are you dealing with Chinese businesses or expat businesses over there, or a hybrid of the two?
Both. I mean, we work with large Chinese clients who are completely Chinese. We work with multinationals. We work with small companies, SMEs, who are fast growing. So we work with a range of different companies. Fortunately, the approach that we take, which is based on science and mathematics, works everywhere. We have to fine tune it, obviously, for each client so we can find what exactly pain point they're trying to deal with. The typical pain points we deal with is a huge degree of uncertainty, volatility, very difficult to look ahead when everything is cloudy. So, how do you do strategy in that sort of environment? How do you get your team to be self-organizing and dynamic and agile? And those are the common things. What's interesting is we always ask a group of managers when we work with them, what are your biggest day-to-day challenges? And we have a whole list of, coming out. And then we ask, if we had asked another group in another country, in another industry, that question, would that list be the same or would it be different? And people say, yeah, it'd be the same. So the challenges that people are facing in the day-to-day are very similar to around the world. It's more to do with the context that's happening in the world rather than any individual company challenge or individual failing.
So in the West, well, so in the UK anyway, we see an increasing awareness in the business community of two quite significant areas. One is everything around social values, and the other is around climate and sustainability. Now, both of those challenge to a degree the simple sort of P&L approach to running a profitable business, and the challenge the business community sees is obviously bedding those in together to actually make them sit side by side and be effective, both in terms of what they're trying to achieve and also ultimately delivering a profitable business environment. I'm intrigued. How do those conversations sit in China?
Very well. I mean, ESG is a very big issue in China, and people do talk about it a lot. And in some respects, China's way ahead. I was in Bangkok recently doing some business, and what really struck me was the level of noise, the traffic. You could hear the traffic. Whereas when you come to Shanghai, it's very quiet because all of the scooters, for example, are electric, and most of the cars are electric. So the level of pollution in Shanghai, the level of pollution in the major cities in China has gone down dramatically. They have invested an awful lot into green energy, and into green electrical vehicles. I mean, the latest blurb propaganda you get from the West is overcapacity. The Chinese got overcapacity. This is a bad thing. Whereas in fact, because they're exporting 16 to 20% of their cars, Germany exports 70% of their cars. So, whereas I don't know, this overcapacity is complete rubbish, according to the CEO of Volkswagen. So there is a lot of effort on green energy. There's a lot of effort on ESG, and those sort of conversations go down well. And you've frozen. Can you still hear me? Can anybody hear me?
Pete's frozen. Can you hear me, Nick?
Just Pete. Well, maybe I'll throw, as Pete unfreezes, who's got questions about China? I'm happy to talk about anything at all about China, and living in China day to day and what it's like. Any questions at all from the audience?
Yes, I have one. This is, I suppose, from an investment perspective, because I've had funds in China through a particular company and Barry Gifford, and what I've noticed in the past month is that the actual fund is actually increasingly doing better, and that seems to kind of dovetail what you're saying. And my sense is possibly it may be a good time to invest in the way that it's developing.
I mean, I have to be wary of giving investment decisions, right? Especially being recorded. But what I would say is the overall business sentiment amongst my colleagues is actually quite positive about China. There is still a huge amount of potential. I mean, I always say there are four S's for China. One is size, speed, sophistication, and what I call shortcut. So size, it's a huge market. And the opportunity for middle classes still to grow is very large. There is a huge untapped potential in consumer goods as well. So there is a lot of, if you like, positive sentiment. And I think that the future is looking better now in China. It's got some headwinds. The geopolitical risks, who knows? I mean, if something stupid happens in the Straits of Taiwan, and we end up with a stupid war, which is highly unlikely, but these things can happen, as we've seen. So yeah, there are some major geopolitical risks, but my view is if that happens anyway, we've all got a problem. So
I'm not asking you for advice, financial advice, Nick, but it's just interesting that what you're saying and what I've read and what I'm picking up in the vibes is that it's going, the whole kind of picture is going up rather than down.
Yes, definitely. Yeah, I mean, last year was not good. So there was definitely a dip last year, but this year is picking up a lot better, and certainly our business has picked up a lot this year compared to last year. So the future is bright. There is a lot of opportunity here.
And that's not giving financial advice. You can do what you want with that, can't you?
Yeah, exactly. But I would honestly, if you've never been to China, get on a plane, come and have a look, because it's the most amazing place. And if you can't afford it, there's a family called the Hutchinsons, and they're doing a series on YouTube, and they've come across for 3 months, and they're making videos of everywhere they go. And if you can deal with their hyperbole, because everything is amazing and fantastic and wonderful, if you can deal with that sort of slight hyperbole of the Hutchinson family, it's a wife, a husband, and their 3 young kids. They're going around China making videos about what's it like. So have a look on YouTube at Hutchinson family, because that again gives you an idea of what this country is like. It's quite an amazing place in many respects.
Thank you.
My apologies, my internet just simply switched off for a minute there, and I've gone over to a backup, and I'm back up and running. So there's the way of getting these things online. So it was good. Hear you talking. That's brilliant.
No worries. We threw the questions open to the floor because I'm sure people have some questions as well.
Very good. So Nick, when you're looking at the difference, you know, obviously, again, you're used to trading in the UK and you're used to trading in China. How do you see, I mean, we heard a little bit earlier from Ching about those differences and those cultural differences, but how do you see the differential of those two business communities when you look at them and work with them and, you know, both advise them and also solicit them as clients? How do you approach that?
Well, I think there are a lot more similarities than differences, but there are a few differences which are maybe nuanced. I think Ching talked about the relational. This is a very relational society. You know, family is very important. And so family and relations are much more important in China than they are in the West. So spending a bit of time just shooting the breeze in a meeting, you know, I found out we sold, we did some business with Alibaba. I think we had about 8 or 9 meetings before we actually made any traction. And it was always just talking generally and just sort of building the relationship, building the trust before we could actually make some inroads. So it can take a bit more time. The sales to closure time, you need a little bit more patience. It's not so Anglo-Saxon, cut to the chase type way of doing business. I'm very lucky. I'm rather impatient. I'm an ex-soldier. I tend to shoot first. I have a business partner who's Chinese, and she does a great job in managing the sort of relational side for me. So that's one difference. The language is obviously different, but the mentality is a little bit different as well. It's very, very pragmatic and down to earth. They're much more interested in end result. And rather than, you know, content and stuff like that. So it's a very pragmatic country in terms of doing business, very down to earth. And as I say, you need to have a business partner. If you're going to do business in China, seriously, there are various ways of doing it. I set up my own company. I own the company, but I have Chinese colleagues who help move the thing forward. So that's probably more important as well. You know, in UK, you can just, or Europe, you can go and set up a company. Having somebody locally is probably a nice to have, but strategically you can get on without it. In China, you really do need to make some contacts, local contacts. Best way to do that, by the way, is just go and visit the British Chamber of Commerce. There is American Chamber of Commerce. You know, there are lots of different chambers of commerce here who can really help with that as well.
Brilliant.
So
I'm noting
a hand up.
Yeah, I'm just going to say Joshua's got his hand up there, and Josh, over to you. What's your thoughts?
Oh yeah, thank you. Sorry, I think I did try to ask a question earlier on, and my signal dropped out. But yeah, so it was just a quick question, really. Obviously, I operate houses of multiple occupancy in the city of Exeter. It's a university city. We've seen in the past, a huge amount of sort of Chinese students. It was just really a question for both of the people on the call, really, to you know, how they think that's going. Is there still a sort of a demand for students, you know, sort of coming to England, or do you think that's going to change and be more in-house you know, sort of in China? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, a couple of things then. I mean, the headwind in terms of students coming from abroad is mainly with the UK government, who, in my view, are acting like absolute idiots, because they count any student coming in as an immigrant. And so, you know, they have this sort of mindset, let's cut down student numbers and we can cut down immigration, which is crazy. British universities now depend a lot on foreign students overall, not just from China. In terms of the view of UK universities, UK universities have taken market share from the American universities. Because the geopolitical tension with America has not helped the American universities attract Chinese students, and there have been in the Chinese press and also on the sort of the netizens, there have been some rather sad stories of Chinese students who've, you know, been not beaten up, but certainly, you know, feeling less than welcome in the American campuses. So the opportunity is there, very much so, and also the popularity is there. There's some very good schools, you know, Wellington, Harrow, you know, Dulwich. They have some very good schools in China which act as feeders. But a lot of parents would like to see their kids go abroad. And there is that hunger and that thirst to learn, go abroad, learn and come back. And I always ask, people if they honestly think China's so bad, why do you think so many people come back from the universities? And so, there is still a large opportunity. The headwind will be the UK government rather than the Chinese side cutting down, is my view. Anyway, Ching, you may have a different view.
I'll be honest with you, funny you ask this question. Again, my meeting last night, one of the businesses they're doing is sending the Chinese students to the UK. So obviously throughout the conversation, I agree with Nick. The demand is definitely there. And then due to geopolitical tension, the UK is a more profitable than preferred country than the USA. And actually, Nick, you're right. It's the UK government just being a little bit pig-headed and choking up this major income for the UK universities. The UK brand is very good. The Chinese parents want to send their children out. It just depends how the UK government is playing this stupid game now. So yeah, it's not, there's no demand. Demand has always been there, steady, little bit increase due to in comparison with USA. So definitely.
And in the UK, the majority are postgrad. So, you have undergrad and postgrad. The UK for postgrad is very attractive, and the majority of Chinese students coming into the UK universities are postgrad rather than undergrad.
Very interesting. Chin and Nick, thank you so much for that. It's extremely insightful, sort of hearing your view. As I said, sort of we operate in the house of multiple occupancy market, and we've seen over the last 2 years, we've seen this happen, this decline that you're talking about. Everything I can relate to you saying, but I'd love to, sort of reach out to you both and, possibly look at maybe solving this, sort of opportunity, because obviously we have multiple rooms in the Ext area, and, it's a very desirable, sort of university for Chinese students. I apologize if I jumped in on somebody else speaking there.
No, that was just me.
I
hadn't given you the chance to come back, so good that you did. Good that you did. Has anyone else got any other questions they want to throw at Nick and Ching? Well, there you go. Okay. Well, both of you, that's been really truly fascinating, and it is absolutely, in the UK we are very much led, of course, by the media we see, and it's lovely to get a grassroots and an in more in-depth opinion, thoughts, experience related on all this Anglo-Chinese.
I would add, don't let the media put you off. What's interesting is that everybody I've met who's come to China always says the same thing, and it's like, oh my God, I never realized it was like this. So, because we have a very narrow view in the UK and in the West generally about China, but it's definitely worth a visit. I always say visit China before China visits you, but seriously, on a more serious note, there's a lot of opportunity. Best way is get on the plane, come as a tourist, have a look, go visit the British Chambers of Commerce. That's what I did. I just got on a plane and came to have a look and visited various people and spoke to people and realized, yep, there is an opportunity here.
So a sort of a final question from me that just occurs, irrespective of your own political views, as an outlook on the relationship between the UK and China and business. We are likely to be seeing a change of government coming up around the turn of the year, just before or whatever. How do you think that's going to impact on all of these conversations we're having here? I mean, that's for both of you. Nick, maybe you want to lead on that.
There is so much negativity about China. I'm not sure to what extent any politician can stick their neck out and say, actually, we should be doing more stuff there. So I don't know if there's going to be a huge change. Of course, we talk about politics in the UK. We live it, we breathe it. In China, nobody gives a toss about politics. They say it's not democratic. Actually, we have local elections. Local government are elected in China, but not many people vote because they're not really interested. They're just saying, you guys get on, do your job, and if you don't do your job, we'll kick off. And we saw that with the zero COVID. After a while, people started kicking off, and very rapidly, it was, okay, we got that wrong, change. We went from zero COVID to herd immunity in 2 weeks. So in terms of the UK political area, my view is there may be some change, but I don't see any major change in the next few years. I still think there's going to be this tension and this rather sort of negativity towards China. I don't see that changing anytime soon, sadly. However, having said that, will that have a big impact on business? And the answer is probably not. What's interesting, looking back historically, when I can't remember who had the Dalai Lama around for tea, but one of the past prime ministers had the Dalai Lama in for number 10 for tea, and the Chinese had a complete wobbly, put the UK on the naughty step. For 2 years, I think there was a very, very, very frosty relationship. During that time, the business between China and the UK went up.
Brilliant. Ching, what's your take on that sort of potential change in politics?
I think it's quite interesting because, UK had always a very good reputation, because when I go out, I represent the UK side into China. So a little bit weird angle from Nick. And since Brexit, and I'm quite provocative, and when I, in the safe environment and I'm a comfortable environment, I would do ask, the Chinese the opinion regarding UK as a country. So it started with like, why you Brexit? Why you UK? Why are you doing this? Like, what's wrong with you British people? And then we had, obviously how we deal with pandemic and then also the Tory party keep on throwing out the leader. It saddens me that UK now almost a little bit a laughing stock to the Chinese. I think it's a love relationship between the UK and the China. I'm just general speaking. The Chinese never had a royal family anymore because all they had been chopped off per se. And they fascinated by the British royal family. They other than the shopping retail center in Oxford, the Peckham Palace is the #1, tourist place other than the shopping center, obviously. And they just don't understand. They love the whole anything British, but they don't understand how come the Britain just throw everything apart, away, and they're just acting in Chinese people's eyes so stupidly. So they get frustrated with us. They love us. They want to come. They want to collaborate. They want to enjoy. They want to open doors. They want to send their children here. They want to send their money here. They want the British business and the goods and everything go back to China. But they just like scratching their heads like, I think we all do. And I totally agree with Nick. Propaganda. There's a lot of propaganda. Lots of propaganda going on. Do you know what? I'm going to say, China's not for everybody. There's a certain, I work with people, they refuse to go to China, but they have to work with China for, business reasons. It's not for everybody, and so be it. So be it. But today we talk about the China-UK relationship, what's going on. And I think it's just a fun discussion, general speaking, the people love each other. And that's the bottom line.
Ching, Nick, thank you.
And there's probably a lot more...
Mark,
I know propaganda, I think, in the West than there is in China.
Mark's got his hand up, and we are over time. So, Mark, literally, I'm going to give you.
It's a very, very big question. I noticed we haven't mentioned India, and India will have 25% of the world's under 25s. India's not been mentioned. India-China competition, interesting thought.
Yeah. And leave that thought because we are over time, even though we started way under time. But that is testimony to how interesting and the conversation it's been. So Nick and Ching, thank you so much.